Hi everyone, I'm Summer with Eco Collective, and today I'm going to share a little bit about how to reduce food waste. Earlier this week you heard from Marimar all about how to compost and the importance of that, because anytime you have food waste or food scraps, the most important thing is don't throw it in the trash, because when food ends up in the landfill, it decomposes really slowly and releases methane, which is about 80 to 90 times as strong of a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So that's a really big one to start with. And Sarah also mentioned a few really good tips for reducing food waste. One of them is shopping with a service like Imperfect Foods, or just generally getting the uglier produce at the grocery store, because that tends to be the stuff that ends up going bad and doesn't get sold and gets thrown out. And then another awesome tip that she gave is reusing food scraps when you can. She showed us how you can use food scraps, keep them in the freezer, and then make vegetable broth with them. And of course, one other awesome thing that Sarah shared was how to use up what you bought and meal prep large portions in advance so that they're portioned out in meals so that you actually eat what you buy. So now I'm going to get into my personal favorite tips. This is something that's really important to me. It's kind of crazy to me how much food gets wasted. I see it all the time in my friends' and parents' refrigerators, where there's so much food and it's not getting eaten, and at restaurants where there's tons of leftovers left on people's plates. About 40% of all food produced in the United States does not get eaten, which is really, really sad and such a waste. Not to mention the environmental impact of all of that food waste and all of the resources that went into making the food. So personally, my favorite tip is to just buy less food to begin with and eat what you have. One way that I do that is I have a pretty small kitchen. I live in a studio apartment, and as you can see, this is on the smaller side of refrigerator, and I don't have a ton of cabinet space. I don't have a pantry or anything like that, and it actually serves me well because a lot of the times know exactly what food I have to eat. I don't keep a ton of different ingredients on hand at all times, and that allows me to know what I have, make sure that it doesn't go bad, just hidden behind everything else in the pantry or refrigerator, and I can get a little creative and just mix and match and find things that work together. One of my personal favorite things to do that might seem a little weird if you're not used to it is letting my fridge and pantry get totally empty. I'll show you what my fridge looks like right now. It's not totally empty, but it's a little sparse, especially if you compare it to a lot of other refrigerators that I see. The benefit of this is I really know what I have in my refrigerator because I can see it all. And I like to use old glass jars for things because then I can see what I have. I just get creative, and a lot of times I don't use recipes when I'm cooking. I like to cook without recipes because that way if I have an ingredient, I can just use all of what I have and just eyeball it. I don't end up going out buying a whole nother head of broccoli or whatever it might be only to use this much of it. I just kind of throw things together with whatever I have in the fridge. So my empty-ish fridge is my inspiration, and I go from there. My other favorite way to reduce food waste is I always carry some kind of container with me when I'm out. It might even be my water bottle or a random jar that I have, or an actual container. Anytime I'm out, I'm the type of person who won't finish all of my food, and a lot of times the people I'm with won't finish their food, and I have a container with me to just make sure that it's gonna get taken home. Sometimes people are like, oh, I don't know if I need a box, it's only a little bit, and I will take any amount. Like if it's 3 bites of food, I'm gonna take it home because never once have I regretted having leftovers at home, especially when you have an empty fridge like mine. You really appreciate ready-made food. Here I have some leftover Thai food and some old breadsticks that I'm gonna take for lunch tomorrow. In general, something that I like to do is to portion out my meals. So when I have leftovers and I'm keeping them in the fridge, I like to keep them all set up as one meal because then it makes it really easy to take it and eat it the next day. I like to make it as easy as possible to eat leftovers to make sure that they get eaten. Another thing that you can do to make sure that it's as easy as possible to eat the food that you have is to prepare ingredients ahead of time so that they're really easy to use. So I end up using diced up onions really frequently, so whenever I cut open an onion, I just dice up the whole thing and store the rest of it in a jar like this, and that way it's easy to cook with and makes my life a whole lot easier afterwards. Another important way to reduce food waste is to make sure that you're storing your food correctly so that it doesn't go bad. One thing that I really like to do is I have this veggie bag, which is just a cloth bag where I keep it a little bit damp, and that makes sure that the greens inside stay fresh. Another thing you can do is, if you don't have a specific bag like this, you can just spray a regular cloth produce bag and that does the trick. You might just have to wet it a little more often to keep it moist. The way that it works is the vegetables, leafy greens like this, need to breathe and then they need moisture. This cilantro is a few days, maybe a week old, and it's still looking nice and crisp, which is better than I can say for cilantro that I leave in the fridge without it. Root vegetables like carrots like to be stored in a glass of water. These carrots actually got mushy and a little wilted in the fridge, and what you can do is actually put them in a jar of water. You can actually revive some foods and rescue them from going bad, believe it or not. The next great way to reduce food waste is to preserve food if it's really abundant or you just can't eat it all. One way to do that that's super easy is if you have too much of something or something is maybe close to getting bad, you can throw it in the freezer. I put a ripe banana in the freezer, and that way it's ready to use for smoothies later on and I can save it for whenever. I like to have something sweet in my oatmeal, so I'll go for dried fruit like dates because I know that it will keep for a longer time. A couple other ways you can preserve your food is to either can or pickle the food. These are canned pears. My grandma had a pear tree in her backyard and she taught me how to can pears to preserve them, so it's really special now. I have so many jars of these pears and it makes me think of my grandma every time. Another thing you can do if you have an abundance of food is to pickle them. These are pickled cucumbers from when they were in season. These are actually from Chef Daniel from one of Eco Collective's Zero Waste Dinners. And if you're really overflowing with some food, don't hesitate to give it away. A lot of times other people would be happy to take it off of your hands if you just have way too much. For example, over the summer, I was house sitting for my sister and her husband, and they had a garden that had so many zucchini, and I was harvesting them while they were away, and I had so many zucchinis and I was afraid that they would go bad. So I brought them to friends and coworkers, and another thing that you could do is even give some away to your neighbors on your local Buy Nothing group. Another thing I do is whenever I'm over to dinner at my parents' house, they always make so much food, and recently my mom made a bunch of sour cream over Hanukkah with our latkes, and it's cashew coconut sour cream that she made, and she filled up this container for me. It's honestly really fun because you can help other people reduce food waste and save a lot of money by using leftovers. Another thing that you can do to reduce food waste is to just eat it anyways. What I mean by that is just because a lot of people don't eat the stems on something doesn't mean they're not edible or nutritious. So when I'm chopping up cilantro, for example, I chop up the whole thing including the stems and I eat it. It's delicious. Also, I like to do the sniff test. For instance, this mustard is supposedly expired. However, it still smells fine, so I'm gonna eat it anyways. Are your carrots wilted? You can revive them in a jar of water. Ready to eat that carrot? Just scrub it instead of peeling it. Another thing that I do that might seem a little bit masochistic is I really don't keep a lot of snack food or convenience food at home because I find that if I have it, then my food is more likely to go bad, and if I don't have it, I'm more likely to eat the weird leftovers that I have in my fridge. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope you learned some cool tips about reducing food waste. Comment below if you have any questions or extra tips that you like to do to reduce food waste in your life. If you are really interested in this topic and you want to know a little bit more detail, I'm going to link some resources for you to check out so you can figure out how to store every fruit and vegetable imaginable and get some awesome cooking tips, preserving tips, things like that. Some of my favorite resources are Zero Waste Chef and Mama Eats Plants. Those are two really awesome zero waste food blogs.